Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Fantasy 420, where today we're going to be discussing the catcher position for the upcoming 2019 fantasy baseball season. Although people usually don't get as excited about this position because catchers hit further down in the order, produce less numbers than the other positions, I think there's a lot of value there this year, and depending on which universe you believe in and who you believe in, you can definitely find somebody who's going to beast up this year. So instead of using a specific platform, because I don't know if you're going to draft from Yahoo or ESPN or somewhere else, I'm going to use an aggregate site. It's called www.fantasypros.com and use their rankings to decide whether or not we want to pick them around where they're drafted and use that to decide a composite ranking and use that instead of a specific site. So I'm going to start off with a lot of sites' number one catcher. Usually you don't recommend a value position at number one, but Gary Sanchez is actually the 55th ranked player on Fantasy Pros, and I think that's a tremendous value for him. Last year, if you picked him, he obviously had a nightmare season with injuries limiting him. When he was on the field, he batted less than 200. And given how good the offense was with Stanton and Judge and how high he was hitting in the order, it was a tremendous disappointment. And you drafted him in the first or second round, so people are going to sour on him or not believe that he's going to come back. But usually, if somebody's drafted in the first or second round, you believe in the talent for a reason. So I'm willing to buy into a comeback season at rank 55. So 10 or 12 team league, that's going to be around the fourth or sixth round. And I think that if you can capitalize on that value, 2 years ago, he is coming off 33 homers and 90 RBIs in that same lineup. And they could also land a Harper or Machado going forward and boost that lineup going forward. You won't be able to pitch around him, and he could definitely easily go off. So I would recommend buying into Gary Sanchez first off. Next, I'm going to move on to JT Realmuto, who obviously did really well for the Marlins in the last season. They unloaded him in this season. He wanted to go to a contender, so he went to Philly from the Marlins. So he's landing in a spot with a team I think is going to be contending for that playoff spot, especially if they also land Machado or Harper, and they could easily win that division. Probably second at least behind the Braves, who I also think are going to be very good. But moving on, he is being picked at around 105. So once again, if somebody reaches for him the eighth round, he could fall to the 11th or 12th. And I do predict that number will rise, but he's going to hit up in an order that is going to be contending in the season, going to be really good. And he was top 5 last year in home runs, RBI, and average. That's based on people who hit a reasonable amount of at-bats at the position, and he's going to be surrounded with more protection. He's not going to be hitting in the Marlins where people are going to be pitching around him, and he's going to get a lot of quality looks and quality at-bats, and I definitely believe in the talent. So I would buy into him. Even if the numbers rise, I think the better team, like I said, contending with Machado or Harper, probably going to the Phillies, I would bet Machado lands there. So I would buy into JT Realmuto. I think he's going to do really well again, and I think that's a great spot for him. I think not as screaming of values in my opinion, but if you wanted to buy into Buster Posey at 112, I think that's a really good value. Salvador Perez coming off of the catcher leading 27 home runs in a injury plague season at 182 is pretty good value as well. Yadier Molina at 197 with 20 home runs last year. Another team I expect to contend in the Cardinals, acquiring Paul Goldschmidt. 197 for Yadier Molina coming off at 20 home runs. I would not blame anybody for buying into that. Um, the next person, though, that I really want to highlight as a value pick, I think, is Yasmani Grandal at 199, so around 200. That is a 20th round pick if you're in a 10-team league. So I think that a team that paid a lot to get him there to shore up that position of need. You have a ton of people hitting in front of him to drive in. Yelich, Shaw, Braun, Aguilar, Kane. I mean, I don't think it would get there, but this team's just going to be producing so much runs, and they just paid him around $16 million to play. He's going to play every single day. Excuse me. So 24 home runs last year, moving on to a team that is going to pump him up based on his postseason struggles, being benched. They're really going to rally behind him. He knows, they know they're going to be contending for a World Series. I actually think that they would be my number one contending team coming out of the National League this year. I think Major League Baseball in general is going to be super exciting this year. There's going to be so many teams that have a chance to win, unlike the NBA where there's only a few. I think this year it's going to be toss-up between a lot of teams, and I would expect the Brewers to actually make the World Series with that tremendous amount of depth coming out of that lineup and some good pitching. But anyway, I would definitely buy in at 199 with that boost in lineup and arguable boost in lineup from the Dodgers. But I think that just the camaraderie, and they know that they need to pump him up, and I assure you that that's been happening so far. So I would buy into him. I would also recommend two players coming up. Francisco Mejia from the Padres, if you want to buy into him. He had kind of a bad year last year after being traded, batted less than 200, but that was an extremely small sample size. And once again, a team traded for him. It's former top prospect, really young for the Indians. So if you think he's going to excel for the Padres, buy him. Jorge Alfaro, who underwhelmed for the Phillies, and that's why they traded for JT Realmuto. If you think he's going to have a rebirth in Miami, he's going to hit further up in that lineup than most people normally do for a catcher, because that team is not so great. And once again, they traded for a prospect in Sixto Sanchez and Alfaro. So if you think he'll bounce back for the Marlins, you can buy in him. Finally, I have two more players who I think could be really good values this year. And at 291, you have Wellington Castillo. So very end of drafts, might not even have to draft him. You can pick him up as a free agent. Obviously limited to 49 games last year with the suspension, but he is an extreme bounce back candidate. He's projected currently to bat sixth in that lineup, which as a catcher is really good. And that team could still land Machado or Harper. And if they do, I think that they'll finish in second in that division. The AL Central is extremely weak with the Indians going to win, I predict, no matter what. But anything can happen in baseball. And if the White Sox do in fact land Machado or Harper, I do think that with Abreu and Castillo and one of those two guys, they would easily be second above the Twins and the Royals. And who knows, right? They could make some noise, over exceed expectations. Maybe some people get hurt on the Indians. Knock on wood, is obviously that's my favorite team. But yeah, he could definitely surprise and further up in that order, come back pissed off after being suspended for steroids. So I definitely would buy into him at that price. And finally, 391 ranked Jonathan Lucroy. He was signed in the last offseason to the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, who I would predict to finish second in that division, but could easily, with my favorite player in the league, Shohei Ohtani, and Mike Trout, and him, and a few other great years from a few other great players on that team and in that lineup, they could definitely surprise and win that division and be this year's surprise team coming out of the American League. So it's a bummer Shohei's not going to be able to pitch this year, but he'll be able to focus more on DHing, and we can get more into him later. But that's going to finish my catcher preview for the 2019 fantasy baseball season. And we'll be back tomorrow with another video, you guys. I appreciate it, and thanks a lot.